example of the Messenger Muhammad. And the worst thing, the worst of all the affairs, the worst of all the matters, are those things that have been newly introduced and newly innovated in the religion. Because every matter that has been newly brought into the religion is a deviation and a going astray. And all of that deviation and all of that going astray has its ultimate destination in the fire of hell. Some years ago, I'm sure most of us probably remember an incident that took place in the United States of America, when a black man by the name of Rodney King was beaten brutally by the LAPD, the Los Angeles police force. Not that that was a particularly strange event. Apparently it's something that happens quite often in America. But what was strange about this particular event is that the whole thing was caught on a video camera by someone filming the whole incident from his flat. This footage of this man on the ground being beaten, kicked, senseless by the police was then released to the media, and during the subsequent trial, the policemen, all of them, were acquitted. They suffered no charges, they were not put up for any type of criminal activity. And what proceeded to happen in the United States of America were the worst riots that the United States of America had seen, well, anyway, for a very long time, if not in their history. And the cry, the slogan of the rioters was a very simple but amazingly true statement. No justice, no peace. That was their slogan. No justice, no peace. And this is a very true statement. The fact is that the affairs of the human being in our social activities as human beings, living together, acting together, they are built upon justice. Human beings can bear all sorts of hardships. Human beings can put up with starvation, they can put up with extreme thirst, extremes of hot and cold, disease. In fact, human beings can easily put up with war, and sometimes, quite often, they're quite happy to go to war. But one thing, well, there are other things, but one of the things that human beings cannot actually put up with for an extended period of time is injustice and tyranny and oppression. It is only a matter of time before people will rebel and overthrow in one way or another that injustice and tyranny and oppression. So justice and the concept of justice is something really as intrinsic, and this could actually take us in a very interesting direction, but I'm not going to let it go there. But it's very interesting that for human beings, there are intangible, emotional, psychological needs that we have that are in fact more, just as, if not more important than our physical needs. So, for us to have justice can be as important, if not more important, than having food and drink, and shelter and clothing. As human beings may be quite ready to forego all of those things to try and create some justice and to remove oppression in their life. So before we answer the question, really, Islamic law, justice or oppression, we have to start examining what is justice. What do we mean by justice? What is this justice that is so important that human beings demand it and want it and seek it and desire it? Well, one way of understanding something is by examining its opposite. One way of understanding something is by examining its opposite. So the opposite of justice could be defined as oppression, injustice, tyranny. Those are some of the things that we could understand to be the opposite of justice. Generally, anyway, justice implies putting everything in its correct place. That's what justice is. It is putting something in its correct place. And injustice or oppression is taking something out of its correct place. And with the concept of justice, you find very much linked up with the concept of justice is the concept of rights. What are the rights? The human rights, the animal rights, the whatever rights it may be. Okay? Our rights. Now, the concept of justice does not necessarily mean compassion, mercy, kindness, forgiveness. Those things are actually not necessarily equated with justice at all. Justice could be brutal. Justice could be harsh. And it could still be termed as being justice. Compassion, mercy, forgiveness, they are other qualities. Desirable ones, albeit. But because there is harshness or there is toughness in something, that does not mean that that thing is lacking justice. And that is an important thing to know. On the opposite hand, oppression therefore means putting things in the wrong place. Unbalance, being unfair, not giving things their rights. So, these are the concepts. This is the concept of justice and oppression. What is justice? What is oppression? But we find that this idea of justice is always going to be somewhat subjective. I mean, whose idea of justice are we talking about? Who defines justice? What really is justice? Does every human being have some type of common idea of justice? Certainly true justice is something that nobody is going to be able to complain about. If true justice has been established, no one is going to be able to argue that yes, the just thing was done. That's true and perfect justice. So, if we talk about the Islamic law, okay, justice or oppression, okay, it asks, well, there's another question that comes to mind. Now, is justice something that is linked with law, or is justice a quality that exists on its own? Okay, this is the question. For example, can you be just although the laws that you implement are unjust? Okay, can you have just laws? Can you have just laws, but if the people who are implementing those laws, they are unjust, what do you have? Certainly in that scenario, it's going to be not so confusing. You can have laws that are very just. You can have laws that are balanced and laws that fit the needs of human beings. You can have the most excellent constitution and you can have the most excellent laws and excellent legal framework. But if the people who are applying those laws, they are unjust, then it doesn't matter what the laws are. If the people who are implementing those laws are unjust and they implement them in an unjust manner, you have injustice. But now the question comes the other way, and this is something we're going to have to return to it towards the end of my talk. How about the other way around? What if you have a people who are just? If you have a people who are just, they aspire for justice, they seek justice, and they try to be just. But the laws that they're trying to implement and the way of and the system that they're trying to establish is fundamentally flawed. it in fact puts things in the wrong place, then can you really have a just system? People perhaps will accept it because there is the feeling of justice, of equity, that they are being dealt with fairly. But ultimately, that is still going to perpetrate in its end injustice. However just the people are who want to implement it, if the laws and the system itself is unjust, then the end result is going to be a negative one. It is going to be a disastrous one ultimately. I won't use the word proof, but what I do want to try and establish today is two things. First of all, that the laws of Islam, the Sharia, the Islamic law is not only just, but it is in fact the only truly just system. And the second thing that I want to establish is that Islam seeks to nurture and encourage and drives the true believer to be just in and of him or herself. So let's just talk about the first thing. There are no shortage of verses from the Quran, statements from the Prophet, and examples from the lives of his companions to show how Islam teaches, preaches, enjoins justice, and forbids and admonishes and commands to fight against injustice. So let's just go through a few of those verses. I've eliminated quite a lot, so I've been quite selective here. I'm not going to be comprehensive. This is just to give an overview. For example, let us take Surah Al-Nahl, which is the 16th surah or the 16th chapter of the Quran. If we look in verse 90, the meaning of the verses say, Allah commands doing justice. God commands doing justice, doing good to others and giving to near relatives, and He forbids indecency, wickedness and rebellion. He admonishes you so that you may take heed. And in Surah Al-Hajj, which is the 22nd chapter of the Quran, in the 41st verse, so verse 41, these are the people who, if we establish them in authority in the land, they will establish prayer and pay the poor Jew, the zakah, and enjoin justice and forbid evil. And the final decision of all affairs is in the hands of Allah, in the hands of God. And again in Surah Al-Imran, which is the 3rd surah in the 25th ayah, it states, warn those who deny Allah's revelations, slay the prophets without any justification, and kill those from among the people who enjoin justice about the news of a painful punishment. Meaning, warn those people who slay the prophets and kill the people who enjoin justice. Warn them of a punishment. And again in Surah An-Nisa, which is the 4th surah, we find in the 135th verse, O you who believe, stand firm for justice. Stand firm for justice. And this is actually a very strong verse of the Quran talking about justice. O you who believe, stand firm for justice and bear true witness for the sake of God, even though it is against yourselves. So the Quran tells us to stand firm upon justice, to speak the truth, even if it is going to be against yourself. When you witness truthfully, even if it is against yourself, your parents, your relatives. And it does not matter whether the party is rich or poor. Allah is the well-wisher of both, so do not let your selfish desires swerve you from justice. If you distort your testimony or decline to give it, then you should remember that Allah is fully aware of your actions. And Ibn Kathir, who's one of the famous commentators on the Quran, he mentioned an incident where one of the Prophet's companions, his name was Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he was sent to collect the jizya. The jizya is a tax that is taken from non-Muslims who live in the land of the Muslims, okay, under the protection of the Muslims. So he sent this Abdullah, the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, sent this Abdullah ibn Rawaha to collect the tax from the Jews of Khaybar, okay. And when he came to them, they tried to bribe him. They tried to bribe him and they said to him, go easy on us. And so this Abdullah, he said, by Allah, there is no one who is more beloved to me than the Prophet Muhammad. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. And I have come from the Prophet Muhammad, who is the most beloved to me. Yet my love for him and my hatred for you. And he actually said that you are more despicable to me than some despicable creatures. But I would never let my hatred for you cause me to do you injustice. Meaning the fact that I hate you, the fact that I hate you is not going to make me treat you in a way that is unjust. I'm not going to treat you in a bad way. Because why? Do not let your hatred of a people, the Quran tells us, do not let your hatred of a people cause you to do them injustice. This is the command of the Quran. And when the Jews heard that, they said, verily this is the justice upon which the heavens and the earth, it rests on this type of justice. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what the Creator tells us in the Quran. Okay, and again a similar surah, in a similar place, in a similar verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah, this time which is the 5th surah in the 8th, it says, O you who believe, be steadfast for the sake of God and bear true witness, and let not the enmity of a people incite you to do injustice. Do justice. That is piety. That is nearer to piety. But when it says that is nearer to piety, it actually means that is piety. Okay? And fear Allah, for surely Allah is fully aware of all of your actions. And Ibn Kathir again, he mentions an incident connected with this, where a man came, one of his companions came to the Prophet, and he wanted to make the Prophet witness that he was going to give one of his child a gift. So when he came, the Prophet said, are you going to give all of your other children the same gift? So he said, no. He said, I will not bear witness to an injustice. You must treat all of your children equally. And even this, that this man wanted to give one child a gift from his children that he was not giving to the others, and he wanted the Prophet to witness that. And he refused. He said, I'm not going to witness that because that is injustice. This is what Ibn Kathir mentions in relation to that. And also in Surah Al-Araf, which is the 7th Surah 1, verse 199, the Quran says, show forgiveness, speak for justice, and avoid the ignorant people. Now, there are also some narrations from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, mentioning the great benefits of those, or the great station of those people who implement justice. And we have examples from the Prophet Muhammad's own life where he showed the nature, how he was very just. So for example, the Prophet Muhammad, he said, behold, the dispensers of justice will be seated on thrones of light beside God, on the right side of the merciful, exalted and glorious. And he said, the dispensers of justice are those who do justice in their rules, in matters relating to their families, and in all that they undertake to do. So meaning the dispensers of justice who behave justly in every matter, whether it's their family, whether the rulings they give, and in fact all matters in their life, they behave in a manner that is just. And here is an incident from the life of the Prophet which really shows, and we will also now see how this example of the Prophet physically really manifested itself in the behavior of those Muslims who were with him, the companions. Okay, so there is an example from a tribe there was a woman from one tribe, from Bani Makhzum, and she had stolen. So they were thinking, some of the people were thinking, who's going to go to the Prophet and intercede on her behalf? Meaning, because they didn't want the penalty of having her hand chopped off to be implemented on her, because she was from this strong tribe. So they wanted someone to go and talk to the Prophet and intercede. So no one dared to do it. So they said, why don't we send Osama ibn Zayd? He is someone the Prophet Muhammad used to love a lot. Okay, so Osama went to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet said to him, do you try to intercede for somebody in a case connected with Allah's prescribed punishments? And then he got up and he delivered a sermon. So the Prophet, when he found that someone was trying to prevent one of Allah's prescribed punishments from being implemented, this is what he said. What destroyed the nations that came before you was that if a noble person among them stole, they would forgive him. And if a poor person among them stole, they would prescribe God's legal punishment on him. He said, by Allah, if Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, stole, I will cut off her hand. Bukhari collected it. Fatima, as we know, was the very beloved daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be on him. He said, look, if my daughter stole, I will implement the punishment of Allah upon her. This is justice. This is equity. That no one is treated differently because of their station, because of their being rich or their being poor. And this in fact is something, this type of justice is something upon which the stability of society is built. And this is something the scholars have mentioned. For example, this is something that Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the great scholars of Islam, he said, that God will support a nation that is just, even if it is disbelieving. So if there is a nation who is just, and justice is the norm in their society, God will support that nation even if they do not believe in God and His Prophet and His revelations. He will support that nation over a nation that is unjust, even if it is believing. So a nation where justice is something that seeks to be established, where equity and fair treatment amongst people is the reality, then God is going to support those people, even if they do not believe in Him, over a nation that is a believing nation, but that nation is corrupt. That nation treats the rich differently from the poor. That nation treats such and such people differently from that and that people. God does not support that nation. Why? Because the affairs of the people, the ordering of society, the peaceful coexistence of human beings depends and is built upon justice. Okay? And this is why there's a beautiful saying from Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he mentioned in one speech he gave to some people, okay, he said, "O my people, Islam is a mighty fortress and a sturdy gate. The fortress of Islam is justice and its gate is truth. If you destroy the fortress and demolish the gate, you will undermine the defenses of the religion." And he went on to say, Islam will remain strong so long as the sultan or the authority is strong. And he says the strength of the sultan or the authority, the ruler, it doesn't come from flogging or from the whip, nor from killing with the sword, but from ruling with justice and holding fast to truth. This is what the strength. And this is actually not true just of the Muslim nation, it is true of any nation. In fact, if you look through history, you will find it. I am sure if you study history carefully, you will find this is the story of the nations of people. That when people implement justice, then you find that their society strengthens and prospers. When they stick to truth, then that society strengthens and prospers. And when they abandon it, then surely that society will begin to disintegrate as much as they abandon justice. Now, we find that the Prophet's companions, they learned these teachings and they acted according to them. And it's one of the amazing things when you study the early history of Islam, of the early Muslims, what I would like to call the true Muslims. The people who really followed Islam the way it was supposed to be followed. Not like a lot of us today, Ramadan Muslims, we just become Muslim for Ramadan, the rest of the time we just like, I don't know what we are, okay? But these people, look at the way how seriously they took these commands to be just. Abu Bakr was the first ruler of the Muslims after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, and he was very concerned about justice. In fact, one of the first things that he said when he became caliph or khalif of the Muslims, he said, "The weak among you will be strong with me till God willing his rights have been vindicated. And the strong among you will be weak with me if the Lord wills and I have taken what is due from him." What does that mean? He means the poor people are going to be strong. I'm going to treat the poor people as if they're strong and the rich people as if they're weak. So the poor people don't have to worry that because you're poor, I'm going to despise you and I'm going to treat you badly and I'm going to trample over your rights because you're poor and it doesn't really matter. No, I'm going to treat you as if you were strong. And you rich people and you people from noble lineages, don't think that your richness and your nobility is going to save you. I'm going to treat you just like you're a poor person. Meaning people are going to get equity from me. They're going to be treated alike. So no one should be afraid that their rights are going to be transgressed against. And there are many, many examples actually from the lives of not only Abu Bakr, but many of the companions. There's one story about Ali ibn Talib, who was the fourth Khalif. And there's one story, for example, how after a certain battle, someone had stolen his armor. And he found a Christian with his armor. So he accused this Christian that he had stolen his armor and he lodged a complaint with he's the caliph of the Muslims, by the way, right? He's ruling now an empire that stretches from, I don't know, beyond the Euphrates, down into West Africa or whatever, however far it had reached at that stage, not quite that far, but beyond Egypt anyway. So this is the size of his empire, he's the ruler, yet when he sees a man wearing his armor, what does he do? He goes to the judge. He goes to the judge and he lodges a complaint with the Qadi. So the Qadi calls Ali ibn Talib, the judge, he calls the ruler, the whole ruler of the Muslims, and he asks him, okay, who are your witnesses that this is your armor? And he says, well, my servant, he's a witness, and my son, they're the two witnesses, they know that's my armor. And the judge said, well, I can't accept their witness because they have an interest in it. Because one's your servant and one's your son. They've got an interest. So, that was it. So he said, I can't take this armor from the man. So, Ali accepted it. He's the ruler of the Muslims, he accepted it. So if that's the decision of the judge, that's the judge's decision. And he went away. Of course, when the Christian found out about that, he was so impressed. He came with the armor, he said, this is your armor. And also, he gave Ali on top of that a horse. And also, he became Muslim. That's just one example. There's another very strong example. And if you understand, if you know anything about the Arabs before the time of Islam, you will know how very, very much they respected the strong tribes and the noble lineage, and it's something they used to consider to be so important. If you understand really how important this concept of lineage is, you'll reflect on this story. There is a man, there was a certain prince, a Ghassanid prince. The Ghassanids, by the way, were a largely Christian Arab tribe, okay, based in Sham. There was one certain prince who had converted to Islam, and he was staying as an actual guest of Umar. Umar was the second Khalif, okay, and Umar was, in fact, history is fabled with the legends of the justice of Umar. In fact, we could just spend the whole rest of the talk talking about the stories of his treatment of and his dispensation of justice. It's legendary, okay? The justice of Umar. It became known that this was a phrase, the justice of Umar. In fact, even when the Muslim armies were fighting in Syria and the area now that's known as Jordan and Syria and Palestine and that sort of area. In fact, Christians were writing to Umar. They were writing to him, asking him to come and liberate them from the rule of the Byzantines. And in the letter they would say, well, one letter reads that even though they are our brothers in faith, meaning even though the Byzantines are Christians like us, they treat us unjustly, whereas we know that you will treat us justly. So they were inviting the Muslims to come and rid them of the tyranny of the Byzantines. This is how the justice of Umar was known. So there's one man, this Jabala, who is from this noble tribe, this noble man from this noble tribe. He was making pilgrimage. He was making actually the small pilgrimage, and one poor Arab man trod on his cloak and pulled his cloak down. So this man, he hit this poor Arab, smashed him in the nose, right, and sort of pushed him away. And when that happened, this Arab went to Umar. He went to complain to Umar. Again, this is the caliph of the Muslims, and this poor guy is just going up and complaining to him. That's just another thing. I mean, you got this poor guy just going up to Umar, who's the caliph of all the Muslims, and complaining. It's just amazing just thinking about these type of things. I mean, this is a man, Umar ibn al-Khattab, used to sleep sometimes on the steps outside the mosque. He just used to eat dried bread. If you'd seen him, you wouldn't have known him any different from just some, average guy or less than average guy on the street. People used to be amazed at what? That's the leader of these Muslims? This army, this people, this great, the conquering people, and this is the leader? And that was him, Umar. So he went to Umar and he complained about this guy. So Umar called him, and this is what Jalabi said. He said, this rascal trod on my reverence for the Kaaba, okay? And he said, if I wasn't allowed to shed blood here, I would have killed him. I would have chopped his head off, okay? And so Umar said to him, he asked this man, did you tread on his scarf? Did you do this on purpose? Did you aggravate him purposefully? And the man said, no, I was very crowded, the Kaaba's crowded, and I trod in his cloak by mistake. So Umar said to the man, Jalaba, do you agree that this was not intentional? He said, I don't care whether it was intentional or not. He said, I am a noble Arab, and he is some commoner, and it doesn't matter to me whether he did it on purpose or not. He dishonored my position. So Umar said, in Islam there is no distinction between a prince and a commoner. You could not take the law into your own hands merely on the grounds that you are a prince and he is a commoner. So Jalaba got very upset about that. He said, I thought that Islam would add to my dignity and prestige, and here Islam is becoming an instrument for my humiliation. So Umar said, the law has to have its own course, and I'm obliged to do justice. You've got two alternatives. Either you patch up with this man, or you're going to have to face my verdict. And the verdict is going to be that whatever that he did to the man is allowed to do back to him. Okay, so if he's punched the man in the nose, this man is going to be able to punch him back in the nose. Okay, it's justice, right? May not be merciful, but it's just. Okay, so the man says, Jalaba, when he saw that Umar was serious, he says, well, give me a day to think about it. So Umar said, okay, you have a day to think about it. In the meantime, the guy packs up his bags, and he goes off and goes back to Constantinople, and he becomes a Christian again. Okay, and what did he say? He said, I denounce Islam because it doesn't discriminate between a peasant and a foreigner. Meaning, when he went back to Constantinople, to the lands of Christianity, he was going to find that he would be respected for a noble, and he could treat commoners just about any way that he liked. Okay, that's and we got actually quite a few examples of that. One actual personal example himself, where he treated someone badly. Some man came to him, and he used to have a certain time dealing with the normal people, and then he used to have a certain other time for dealing with very important affairs. One guy comes to him when he's dealing with these very important affairs and starts pestering, so Umar lashes out at him with his crop, right? And said, how are you disturbing me at this time? This is not your time. So the man goes off upset, and then Umar, he feels remorse. He goes running after this guy. Now remember, he's the leader of the whole people. Right? He goes running after this guy, begging him for forgiveness. He said, I did you wrong, please forgive me. Okay? And not only that, when the guy says, and the man, he says to the man, take my stick, take this and whip me back. Because I don't want you to have anything against me, not in this life or the next. So the man says, you're the Amir al-Mu'minin, may Allah forgive you and me. Okay? So I forgive you. But that's not the end of it. Umar, he goes back to his house and he starts crying and he starts weeping. Okay? And he starts crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, complaining about his state. He says, this is what he says. He says, "Oh Umar, you were low but Allah raised you up. You were wandering astray but God guided you. You were base but Allah ennobled you and gave you sovereignty over the people. Now one of them comes and asks you for acquittal for the harm done to him and you beat him. What answer would you give before Allah?" Umar kept chiding himself, holding a straw in his hand, and he said, I wish I was a straw like this. I wish my mother had not given birth to me. This is how bad he felt about what he had done. So certainly we can look from those type of things. And we could mention many, many more incidents that Islam is teaching, Islam is enjoining upon the people justice. It's one of the essential qualities that a true believer in God must possess. It is something that the stability of a nation and a people relies upon and is founded upon justice. And it's a thought, by the way, for every Muslim when we wonder about our present condition and we think about our lands. Where do we find justice in the lands of the Muslims? Where do we find it? We don't even find justice amongst the people who call themselves workers for Islam. So this is the sad state in which we are in. Of course, perhaps when we ask this question, Islamic law, justice or oppression, we're not talking about general things. Yes, okay, you might say the Quran enjoins upon justice generally. It generally enjoins and leads people and tells them to be just. Well, that's fine. But no, your Islamic system, you may say, or the Islamic system, and many Muslims may think this as well, is unjust. Meaning, the belief is that the laws themselves and the system itself is unjust inherently. Now, is that the case? The problem with this is that in order to really do a topic like this, justice, you have to really study Islamic law quite deeply. It's very easy to superficially say, oh man, a guy steals and his hands is chopped off? Call that justice? What? Someone commits adultery and they're stoned to death and he apostatizes and it's death penalty and you get flogged for being drunk openly and so on and so on and so forth. Okay? And certainly it's not a problem. We can sit down and we could take each one of these particular individual laws and we can rationalize. In fact, you can rationalize just about anything. Okay? You can rationalize anything, but we can rationalize it. I mean, all of these laws have a very good basis on why they are the way that they are. But the fact is that these laws are founded on a whole different premise. When we talk about, for example, justice here in the West, when we talk about human rights in the West, we have to understand something. The understanding that we have here of justice and human rights and so on and so forth is based upon a particular ideological and philosophical outlook towards the nature of the human being, the nature of society, and the nature of this world. And that is a philosophical outlook that Islam does not share. The concepts that are dominant in the West are essentially ones that are materialistic. Our ideas that we have here in the West of human rights and human wrongs are based upon those materialistic perceptions. But the teachings of Islam are completely different. Those things that Islam considers to be human rights and human wrongs are different. Because the premise on which we understand the nature of the human being, the premise on which we understand the nature of this world itself is different. Because Islam and the system of Islam and the justice system of Islam, and therefore by extension the laws of Islam, are based on the knowledge that there is a creator and that there is a day of judgment and that there is a paradise and that there is a hellfire. And the right of the human being and the things that are considered to be in the Quran, oppression, and what we would consider, as we remember our definition in the beginning, that if justice is putting everything in its right place, and if injustice is putting everything or putting things in their wrong place, it all asks and boils down to the fundamental questions. What is right and what is wrong? What is the right place and what is the wrong place? What is the correct way to behave and what is the incorrect way to behave? What should we do and what should we not do? Those are the questions we have to come back and ask. Because if we're going to accuse Islam and its system and its laws of being unjust, then really to challenge it effectively, you have to challenge its fundamental premise. And vice versa. So, Islam is really telling us that the nature of the human being, the need and the fundamental need of the human being, is just as much spiritual as it is material. If we create a society where although people may seek for justice and strive, now I'm talking about Western society, which I believe essentially the rule of law, the desire for justice is very strong. It is, and it exists. And still probably you will feel in this society, maybe I think it is changing. I think it is changing. Unfortunately it is. But until today you probably still feel that if you go to court, you're going to be dealt with justly. People are not going to discriminate against you because you're like this or you're like that. And the fact is that it still amazes me. I remember a friend of mine phoned me up. It was last year actually. And George Bush's niece, I think, was in court for taking drugs and stuff, and she had to be sent to a rehabilitation center. And Dick Cheney was being pulled up before the courts because he was involved in some bribery and scandals and corruption. And this friend of mine was laughing at the other end of the phone about it, and I was saying, well, I don't know really why you're laughing, because I find it amazing. I mean, this is the second most important man and most powerful man probably in America, and he's been taken before the courts. I said, my brother, that's how we used to be once upon a time. In your land where you're calling me from, do they do that? If the son of the prince commits some crime, is he going to be put up before the courts? You bet he's not. You can be sure he's not. If the president's nephew, if he gets in trouble, is he going to be put in front of the court? You can be sure he's not. He's going to get away with it. I said, so I don't know why we're laughing, really. So I think that that's what we find. But my point is this, is that although the quest and the desire for justice is there, the system itself is the most unjust system. It is the most unjust system because it is based on a completely false premise. It is based on a completely false ideology. An ideology that denies essentially God's existence, that does not seek to rule people by the laws of God, but rather seeks to rule people by the laws and the whims and the opinions and the desires of human beings. And if there is a God, which I know without any doubt that there is, and if God has revealed knowledge from Himself that is perfect according to His absolute infallible knowledge, that He knows the human beings better than they know themselves, then who could be more astray and misguided than people who turn away from that knowledge and they follow their whims and their desires? So let us see therefore what is the nature of truth and falsehood, of right and wrong, of the means that we should judge from the verses of the Quran. This is why we find in, for example, Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is the 49th Surah, the 50th verse, and this He commands, meaning God commands, judge between them by what God has revealed, and follow not their vain desires. But beware of them, unless they beguile you away from any of that teaching which God has sent down to you. And if they turn away, be assured that for some of their crimes it is Allah's purpose to punish them, and truly most men are rebellious. Do they seek a judgment of the days of ignorance? But who, for a people whose faith is assured, can give better judgment than God? Again in Surah Al-Yunus, which is the 10th Surah, and in the 35th to 36th ayah, the meaning of it, it says, say, it is Allah who gives guidance towards truth. Is then He who gives guidance to truth more worthy to be followed, or he who finds not guidance himself unless he is guided? What then is the matter with you? How do you judge? But most of them follow nothing but fancy. Most of them follow nothing but dhan. Dhan means speculation. Truly, speculation can be of no avail against truth. Verily, Allah is aware of all that they do. This establishes, and other verses, a very important premise. Islam teaches that in fact, it is the sole prerogative and right of only one being to determine what is right and what is wrong, what is truly good and what is truly evil, what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And that is the creator of the heavens and the earth. That is the one who is the all-wise and the all-knowing and the all-seeing and the all-hearing, whose knowledge encompasses everything. And there is another aspect that is important. That because the laws of the human beings by their nature are fallible, the laws of the human beings by the nature of the human being, they are always changing. And they're not always changing according to knowledge. Our laws do not always change because we have now discovered some scientific information that gives us convincing evidence that this thing that was bad before, excuse me, alhamdulillah, was bad after. It's not always that. No, sometimes it's our desires, it's our passions, it's our whims, it's our fancies, it's our prejudice. How many laws are passed because of prejudice? Every time a conservative government comes in, they make laws that are beneficial for those people who vote for them and support them. And when a Labour, well, not there's any difference these days, right? But when a Labour party used to come in, they would pass some laws that were beneficial for the people who voted for them. And when the neo-Nazis come in, they'll pass, or if they come in, or if they do come in, or hopefully they don't, but they will pass laws that are going to be according to their political and ideological ideologies. That's the nature of human beings. So when the nobility were in charge, the laws were the ones that benefited them, etc., etc., etc. That's the nature of the human beings. Because human beings always need some things from others. God does not need anything. He doesn't need us to follow His laws. He doesn't need us to obey Him or to disobey Him. It's not going to make any difference to His kingdom, power and sovereignty whatsoever. God only gives us that information out of His mercy and kindness to us. That is His perfect knowledge that He gives to us. If you do that, it is good for you. And if you don't, then that's bad for you. The only one you are oppressing is your own self. But this is something really to think about. When the Muslim armies were attacking the Persians, the great Persian general at the time, a famous Persian general, his name was Rostam. He called the Muslims, he wanted to talk to one of the Muslims. So one of the Muslims came, his name was Rabia. This companion of the Prophet, this is after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, by the way. This companion of the Prophet, he came. Now, Rostam's tent, the carpet on which he and all the nobles had their thrones and their chairs, this was a carpet that was sewn with jewels. The thread was of gold, and this carpet had encrusted into it jewels. The same with the tent. How did Rabia come in? Walks in, oh, look at that. No, he comes with his spear, sticking his spear in the carpet like that, coming up, right? He walks up and sits down right next to the general. So they get him and they throw him on the floor. So he stands up, he says, I thought you were intelligent people, but really I find you're very foolish. Because some of you, they lord it over the others. He said, I did not come here because I wanted to come here, you invited me. So the Rostam said, leave him. Leave him alone. So Rostam said to this man, why are you fighting us? Why are you fighting us? He said, if you want camels, we'll give you camels. You want women, you want gold, treasure, we'll give it to you. Just go back to the desert and leave us alone. He said, we have come to take people away from the injustices of man-made religions to the justice of Islam. We have come to take people away from the worship of other human beings to the worship of the true God. We have come to take people away from the narrowness of this life to the vast expanse of this life and the next. Because those people understood that when human beings rule other human beings according to the laws of human beings, that itself is an oppression and an injustice and a type of tyranny. When people are worshipping each other and worshipping this world, and they have turned away from the worshipper of its creator, there is nothing more unjust than that. There is no greater injustice than that at all. Because if injustice means putting something out of its correct place, and if justice is putting something in its right place, then worshipping God and obeying Him is the most right thing the human being can do. And turning away from that is the most inappropriate and the most oppressive thing a human being can do. And that is why the Quran says, Inna shirka dhulmul azim. Certainly, making partners with God and setting up rivals with God is a most great oppression. This is the basis on which Islam stands. The basis that Islam stands is that the Quran is from the Creator. The laws that are in the Quran, they are from God. Therefore, they are the just laws. But, of course, the effectiveness of those laws and the effectiveness of that system is going to depend on the people who implement it. If they are unjust and they are wicked, well, like I said, I can't imagine a more horrific scenario than living in a country that is ruled by Muslim law, by people who do not have the spirit and do not have the justice and do not have the nobility and do not have the good and noble characteristics that a Muslim should have. If they don't have those characteristics, then Islamic law, like any other law, can be used to oppress and terrify people. So what we really need to ask ourselves is this: if we imagine that the Islamic law is unjust, is it really because the laws of Islam are unjust? Or is it because the people who are implementing them do not implement them with justice? Or is it because those laws that they have do not happen to fit our particular idea of what we happen to think today in the 20th century, for this brief 40 years or 50 years or 100 years that this civilization is probably going to exist? We have these ideas for this period of time. and we happen to think this, and then it's gone. And we have a new set of ideas. This is the challenge, this is the thing that people really need to sit, they need to think about, they need to contemplate on. I know that at the end of that, I might not have provided many answers, but I hope what I've illustrated is that Islam is a religion that calls for justice. Islam is a religion whose earliest followers practiced justice, a justice that they became fabled for. And you should remember that Islam is a civilization that lasted for nearly over 1,000 years. Produced a great civilization. When Muslims talk about going back and implementing the law of God, it's not like Europe and the experience of the Europeans in the Middle Ages. When we think in Europe, oh my God, going back to the God people ruling, we think of the church, we think of witches being burnt at the stake, we think of trial by ordeal, we think of feudalism, we think of chastity belts, we think of all of that. It's horrific. But when we Muslims study our history and we look back, we see a time of unrivaled civilization, advancement, prosperity, justice, equity, nobility. This is our history. Yes, while Europe was in the dark ages, it was the world of Islam that was a light and a beacon of guidance to mankind. Arguably, the greatest civilization human beings have ever produced. If you studied it, you might come to realize that, but because we don't really study it, it's just brushed out under the carpet. 1,000 years, it's like Rome fell and then Europe started. And what happened in between? It's like 1,000 years of Islam is just gone. Rome will study. Rome, although Rome in its height only lasted about, 350 years? 1,000 years of Muslim civilization, boof. The science, the mathematics, the civilization, the arts, the achievements, the philosophy, the mystics, and all of that time the Muslim lands were ruled by the Islamic law. If it's such justice and oppression and tyranny, do you really think that people could have put up with it for such a long time? And in fact, what you find is the Muslim world today is in a big mess. And if you look back in history, you can see when Muslims stopped implementing Islamic law and they started adopting Western law, that's when Muslims started to deteriorate and decline. That's what the history tells us if you go back and look at it. And that in itself should make people think. It just doesn't seem to fit that therefore this Islamic law is a system that is so terrible. And without wanting to delay the talk anymore and to go on to subjects that is not even supposed to be under the topic, but it is another thing that I think every intelligent person in this country needs to think about a lot. Is in this time where it seems as if to some of us that there are people in the West who want to start a conflict between the Western world and the Muslim world. They want it. I don't know for sure, but I have a very strong inclination to believe that there are people who want to see conflict. They want it. Why is this propaganda against Islam? Why this? And they know, they even say, it's not Islam we have a problem with, it's Islamic fundamentalism. But what is Islamic fundamentalism? Examine it. What are the Muslim fundamentalists saying? The Muslim fundamentalists are saying, we don't want British law, French law. We want Islamic law. That's what the Muslim fundamentalist essentially is saying. These countries that have been colonized by the West, with their alien social, political and legal systems interposed in our countries, and that's what we find, Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, all of them. They have a mixture. Malaysia, it's all the same. A mixture of some bits of Islamic law, but with a whole heap of Western law as well. A big mishmash. Muslims are saying, no, we want Islamic law, not some other man-made rubbish. Because this is futile and this is rubbish and this is corruption and misguidance. Those are the people they say, oh, those are the dangerous ones, those are the ones we don't like. You people who just like go to the mosque and say your prayer, you're okay, that's okay, just keep doing that. But these ones, no. Why don't they like them? You know why? Because unlike us, these people study their history. You see, they study the history, they've read the history and they say, wait a minute, when these people followed their religion, they were strong and powerful and we were quaking in our boots. And they were the ones who dominated the world and we were the ones who were just like nowhere. And wait a minute, if these guys start coming back to their religion, does that mean that they're going to start becoming powerful economically, militarily? That they're going to be developing a civilization again? And that means we won't be the big guys anymore. We won't be in charge anymore. We won't have the political, social, economic control of the world anymore. So what should we do? We will make sure that we crush them. Everything that we can do to do it, to keep them down, to keep these people backward, to keep these people in disarray, we will do it. That's why America wants to go and Britain wants to go. They want to, what did they say? Reshape the map of the Middle East. To do what? To bring democracy. So they call it. It's not democracy they want to bring. What they want to bring is their disintegrating society. Their corrupt civilization. It's not going to be justice. They're not going to bring the... I mean, there's lots of good things about the West, but I doubt those are the things that they're going to be bringing. There are a lot of good things about the West and a lot of good qualities, but I don't think those are the things they want to bring. So these are the things that every person should think about. The Muslims need to think about it, and the people who are not Muslims need to think about it. No real conclusions from all of that, just food for thought. Thank you very much, you've been very patient, and may Allah guide all of us closer to the truth. Assalamu alaikum.
Allah khairan to may Allah reward him for the good speech. Now we're open to questions regarding particularly this topic, but we also would like to say that we're open to some other Islamic related questions that you might have and would like that you would like to raise. So, one from the floor.
Very quiet. Don't be shy now.
Do you think that the real reason that Western countries have adopted a more view basis on what people want is that not just because if you have it strictly based on any sort of religious law, that can be easily be misinterpreted, and so by having sort of a general consensus, there's a less chance of that happening?
I don't think that's true. The idea might sound nice, but I don't think that's the reality. I believe, in fact, that I think what is very, very interesting in this regard is referring to some of the ideas that people like Noam Chomsky have come out with. Okay? About the mass media, manufacturing consent. That really, I mean, if we just think about it, you take the average person in England and ask them, what do you think is right and what do you think is wrong? What do you think is good and what do you think is evil? What do you think is appropriate and what do you think is inappropriate? Think about those things. Now you tell me, from where did you get that information? From where did you get your ideas of right and wrong, good and evil, what you should do and what you shouldn't do? Think about it. Anyone? Tell me. Not Muslims, I don't want you to say the Quran, right? But your idea of good and evil, right and wrong, what I should do, what I shouldn't do, where did you get that information from? Who taught you those things? Where did you get that knowledge from? Anyone? Your parents? Yeah, and? Public opinion. Yeah, and? The media. And? Come on. School, your friends, your opinions. Okay, that's where people get their ideas of right and wrong from. Government, media, parents. But their parents, where did they get their ideas of right and wrong from? Government, media. If you really think about it, okay, at least the Muslim can say, I've got a book here, right? And this book tells me, I don't have a Quran with me, I've got a book here, and this book, here it is, it's all written down. I mean, at least the Americans have got a constitution, although it doesn't seem to make any difference. They can just undermine it any time George Bush comes along or whatever. But still, the Muslims say, here it is, written down. This is what God says is right and what is wrong. You got something to, but what have you got to refer to? Nothing. You got to refer to the Sun, BBC, ITV, Channel 4. That's it. That's your point of reference. Tony Blair. Okay? Those are your points of reference. My friends, what do all my friends say? Oh, what are you saying, guy? Okay, bad. We'll say the same thing, right? I mean, we have to really think about, okay, it's all very nice if you're talking about a highly educated society where everyone has studied philosophy and religion and whatever, and all of those things, and every single one of them is making an extremely intellectual, informed decision, although I'd still say, what is that compared to the knowledge and the guidance of God, right? But still, that will be something. At least you could say, well, maybe you got something there. But what? Western society, where most people are more interested, right, in, who won the latest football match? Is Arsenal going to win the FA Cup, or is it going to be Man United, or this? So that's what people are interested in. Going down to the pub and having a beer. I'm sorry, that's the fact. And who's going to be on page 3 tomorrow? That's the average person in this democratic society. They're just ruled and manipulated by who? These ideas that people have are a product of what? You see, look at the Gulf War. Look at this is a perfect example. I've been observing, not the Gulf War, this war that they're going to want to start against Iraq. When it all started off, it was like 58% or maybe even more of people thought Saddam Hussein did not have any weapons of mass destruction. That's what the weapons inspectors said, right, from before. They said he's got nothing. 99% of his weapons are gone, and he's got like maybe 1%, and even those are chemicals that are going to deteriorate after these 10 years. He's got nothing. That's what the last lot of weapons inspectors have said. Now it's like, and that started off, most people thought Saddam hasn't done it, but propaganda, day after day after Al-Qaeda, chemical attack, this, such and such, weapon inspectors, and what do? Boom, they get brainwashed, and now it's all turned around. Now most people do think he's got weapons of mass destruction. In America, they think that Saddam Hussein is a direct threat to that. They're going out and buying tape to stick on their windows and boarding their windows up. They think Saddam himself is going to send missiles over to blow up America. This is what these people think. So, if this is the mentality of those people who are so uninformed, if before September the 11th you asked them to show them where New York was on a map, they couldn't even do it. That's most Americans didn't even know where New York was. Are these the people you think are going to be entrusted to make some... No, I'm sorry, I just don't agree. This isn't democracy. It's the illusion of democracy. First of all, you tell people, this is what you want. Do you want it? Yes, we do. That's what's happening. You want this? That? Yeah. That's it. So really it's just like leading the sheep to slaughter. What is really going on is what? Is that they want us to worship them. Who's they? Who's they is Nike, Gap, multinational corporations, big businesses, the media, Disney, Warner Brothers, all the rest of it, Microsoft. Those are the ones they want us to worship them. Put our trust in them. Put our hope in them. That direct all our efforts and our attentions to them and their ideals. Who benefits from the materialistic philosophy? The idea that there's no God, you're just an evolved monkey after all. Right? You and me, what are we? What are we? Evolved apes. How do you make a monkey happy? Give monkey banana, give man monkey, woman monkey, give monkey something to play with, you got a happy monkey. So what are we? We're laughing, but this is the truth. So if you remember I said in the beginning, right? If I said in the beginning, that in fact, and this is why I said this is an interesting thing, we could get diverted and we come back to it. This is what we're going to get diverted by. How come justice is so important to human beings if we're just like evolved monkeys? If we're just really animals and there's just the material, how come justice is so important? How come all these needs that we have that are not material needs at all? Okay? And this makes us understand that there's a lot more to the human being than that. But you know what? They want to keep us miserable. They want to keep us astray. They want to keep us enslaved. Because why? We'll keep on buying their products, watching their movies, buying their magazines, drinking their drinks, going on their holidays, etc., etc., etc. You know, democracy is just a nice way to do that. So, every system is of course open to exploitation. But I think a religious system, yes it can be exploited, yes it can be abused, that is true. Okay? But that depends on the religious system. But the fact is that if you've got a book, and you're telling people to refer to that book, remember, in the Middle Ages, the only people who read the book, the Bible, were the priests. You're not even allowed to read the Bible. If you were a common person, first of all, you didn't know how to read, because the only people who knew how to read were the monks. And if you wanted to study how to read and write, you had to join a monastery. You had to join the priesthood. It's the only way you get to learn to read and write. And if you weren't part of the priesthood, you could be killed for reading the Bible. That's not the case with Islam. Every Muslim should know how to read the Quran. The Quran has always been in the hands of people, not in the hands of a few. So at the end of the day, we have something we can go back to. You know, so it depends again on the religion. Okay, those things do depend. So, you know, of course, I admit without any doubt that every system is open to abuse and exploitation. But I would say, if you just average it out, no. I would say the system of Islam is going to be the best one. It's going to be superior even with the weaknesses of the human beings, by far. But, you know, that's just something to think about, really, my opinion.
Just remember that.
You mentioned about the justice that was applied by early Muslims.
Yeah.
So would you agree that Umar applied justice, him being your second Khalif?
Yes.
You also talked earlier about the court system in this country, and you think that it's becoming more and more just because they don't discriminate.
I think it's... yeah, okay.
I mean, like, you can, for example, a Christian or Muslim can go in court and they will not discriminate what religion believes.
Right.
And
I agree with that. Well, essentially, I think that that's what they're trying to achieve.
okay.
Right.
You would agree that to favour someone because of him being a Muslim or Christian is wrong. That is not justice.
It depends.
What do you mean? That would be
Well, I'll tell you what I mean. I'll explain exactly what I mean. Okay?
You disagreed with discrimination. Now you're saying...
No, I didn't. If you listen to my talk and you were here for the whole of my talk, I said quite clearly, okay, that the aims and the objectives of the Islamic system is different. The ultimate injustice and the true injustice, what injustice means is to put something in its wrong place. So if you start saying that God became a man and got stuck on a cross and died, and God had a son, you have put something very much...
You mentioned about the justice that was applied by early Muslims.
Yeah.
So would you agree that Umar applied justice, him being your second Khalif?
Yes.
Okay. You also talked earlier about the court system in this country, and you...
Example, if I know in this country, in this society, if I know, for example, that there is a factory that is spewing out poisonous fumes, that is killing people and is going to make their babies mutilated in the most horrific and torturous way, but I just keep on ignoring it and I don't do something about it, we all agree that that's not a just government. So no, you can't. Just let me finish, okay? So, well, if you don't want to have patience to listen to my answer, there's the door over there. You're quite welcome to leave, okay? If you don't want to hear the answer to the question, don't ask the question in the first place. It's my prerogative to take as long as I feel I need to answer the question properly. Well, you can go home. Goodbye. It's nice to talk to you. Okay? And obviously the fact is that I don't think you're even listening to my answer, so I don't see what's the point in responding to your question since you don't want to listen to my answer. So could you actually tell me what I've said so far?
Well, my question was,
could you tell me what I've responded to your question, please? I just want to be sure that you're listening to what I'm saying and I'm not just wasting my breath.
Well, you moved away from my question.
Okay, so I think, excuse me bro, if we could move on to someone else's question.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
I don't see exactly how different. I mean, you take this Islamic law.
Right.
I mean, something that you would see as fundamentally wrong, and I don't know the small nuances, but something that would be wrong to other people that our law sees as right. I mean, I think they're quite similar. It makes sense that they're much more different.
What is different is the underlying philosophy. What is really fundamentally different is what underlies everything. That's what's different. Yes, we all agree that lying is bad, that killing is bad, that stealing is bad. I mean, every society is going to agree on some very core things that everyone is going to agree about without a doubt. Okay? I mean, what is going to differ, for example, is, well, how do we deal with that? That is different. Now, and also it's the priorities. For example, we know from the Cold War, from the time of communism, that communism as an ideology had a whole different set of principles than we do in the West. The Western perception of human rights, for example, is largely based upon individualism, individuality. The right of the individual, which is fair. We all recognize the individual has rights. But the West, generally, as a philosophy, gives the right of the individual almost it is really the paramount. That's at the top. Individual, that is the supreme right. Whereas communism treats as the greatest crime is crime against society, crime against the state. Okay. Now, of course, in the West, when the communists were saying, "Oh, look at their human rights violations and this and that, whatever," but the fact is, they had a very different idea of what human rights were. Now, who's right and who's wrong? Why is the Western idea of human rights right, and the Chinese communist idea or the Russian idea or whoever idea is the wrong one? Who decides what's right and what's wrong? Well, we decide because we're the big guys and we're in charge and we've got the most power and the most authority, so our concept of human rights happens to dominate at the moment.
I think it comes back to what you said. I mean, it's not necessarily a right way. There's many ways implemented badly.
Well, no, I think, yeah, but I think the point is this, it's a very, very interesting subject, it's a deep subject, but this is the point, okay? Everyone, I think, most people recognize that you have to draw some balance between the rights of the individual and the rights of society. No society allows an individual to be absolutely free to do whatever they like. You can't just go and kill anyone and say, well, you know, I felt like doing it, it made me feel good. Right? Okay, but we're laughing. But okay, let's take another scenario. Oh, there's a nice girl over there. I want to have sex with her. I'm married, right? And I've got kids, right? She's a nice bit older, right? Come on, let's go and have a look. Come on, whatever, right? Now, I'm not killing anyone. I'm just having a bit of harmless sex, a bit of fun. But it's not harmless at all. It's not harmless to my wife. It's not harmless to my kids. It's not harmless at all. In fact, more people may end up dying from me having sex with another person when I'm married, and more people may end up dying ultimately than if I just went and shot someone. Because it may mess up my kids, it may do this, it may do that, and as a consequence they all behave like that. Everything has consequences. But we human beings think, oh, you know, a bit of sex, bit of thing, well, what's this? So she gets upset, tough. right? But if I shoot someone, bang, that's bad. It's all very black and white, but it's not black and white. That's the fact is, this human society is not like that. It's not black and white. Our actions and what their consequences are, we have very little understanding of them, because the complexities of it are so enormous. And that's philosophically why Islam says the only one who has the right to determine what is the balance between individual freedom and social responsibility, the only one who knows that is God. I mean, ultimately, the question is going to be, well, how do I know your religion's from God? And that's just a matter of conviction, you know. That's, I believe it, and I believe it because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And for me, they're stronger personally than whatever reasons the West wants to offer me that their system is the best system. But this is the problem. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, but from our point of view, God understands that. So, for example, why are adulterers and adulteresses stoned to death? Well, for the very reason that adultery causes such destruction to society. The family is the bedrock of society. Things that undermine the family, undermine society, and the ultimate result of it, maybe not immediately, you don't even see it, maybe not even in a generation, but after 2 or 3 generations, the chaos that could ensue from that is ultimately much more. So harmful. So there's a very strict punishment. Why? Because that has to be maintained for the well-being of humanity. But that's not something we might ever figure out with our brain. Do you understand? So these are the type of things that does make the emphasis, for example, in the Islamic law is so different than, for example, it is in the Western law. Islamic law, you find, is really a balance between giving the individual freedom, which it recognizes the individual needs freedom, but also we have to be responsible members of society. In the West, we're always struggling to find a balance between those things, and we can never seem to get it. We're always going this way, and it's the same thing with women's rights. It's the same when I started about Rodney King. We forget that in the 1960s, Martin Luther King, right, and Malcolm X were protesting about what? Lynching of black people. Black people are still being lynched in the United States of America in the 1960s. They had segregated buses, segregated schools in the south of the United States of America. Segregation. From George Bush's thing, he's probably alive when all that stuff was still going on. That's America in the 1960s. That is not a long time ago. So these are and now, you know, I'm not saying you can move from one extreme to the other when it comes to racism, but there may be other things like women's rights. Okay? Women, of course, need rights. But women happen to be biologically those section of society that biologically and mentally are equipped the best to bring up the children and to nurture them and to care for them. And it's something that even if you believe in evolution, you've got to admit that. Right? But if you have a whole society whose drive and whose aim is economy, money, get everyone out working, get the women out there, we need more money. If you have more money, then what happens ultimately? You get a disintegration of the family, you get a disintegration of the home, etc., etc. You have consequences. Islam does, in my belief, draw the perfect balance. If it's implemented properly, it draws the balance. Why? Because it's from God, who knows the needs of the human beings. God knows the balance that we don't know. Do you understand? So it is philosophically different, and practically, ultimately, yes, it is different. It is very different.
You mentioned earlier the fundamentalist sort of big problems with westernization of the Islamic countries. Do you think that this is sort of an inherent human nature rather than sort of westernization? Because you yourself mentioned earlier in speaking that mobility was looked on very highly. So then you think the seeds were already there, and you can't blame the Western world for very received wealth.
That's a very good point. I agree with you 100%. It's not the fault of the West, it's the fault of the Muslims. I'm not blaming the West, I'm just trying to expound on what I think are the motivations behind it. But on the other hand, I'm the last person who says it's the West's fault. Not at all. Okay, in fact, I said in my talk also that the Muslims need to think about themselves and think about their societies. And one of the things that I personally believe is the reasons why Muslims are weak and why the West is strong is because Muslims do not establish justice. They do not have justice. By and large, their societies are corrupt. They're full of injustices. They don't have equity. They don't put things in their right place. And it's made even worse, as the Quran says, who is worse than the one who knows the truth and doesn't follow it? It's even worse when you know that here is God's revelation and here is the way, the perfect way of life, but you throw it behind your back and you follow something else. Then you're worse than a person who doesn't even know. So therefore the punishment that's going to come to you is going to be worse. So no, I would agree. I think Muslims are the ones to blame. But on the other hand, people are going to be thinking, what is going on, right? Why do we want to fight with this and that and whatever? And I think that that's all I'm trying to point out. Rather than blaming the West, I'm just saying, this is their motivations, this is what they're doing, these are the things that are driving them. But if the Muslims were following their religion, it wouldn't really affect them very much at all.
You mentioned that the Muslim nation was powerful and great when they implemented the Islamic laws.
Yeah.
What can one say to people who would say, okay, the Western nations in the Dark Ages were sort of ruled by religious laws, and when democracy came,
Yes.
they became a great nation.
Exactly.
Science
Yeah.
and power, and they are now powerful because they
Yes.
are democratic. Why this is not the best? This would not be the best system.
That's a good question. But that shows the difference between a true religion and a false religion. That's one argument I will say. I could use this as a type of argument to show that Christianity was not the true religion. If it was true, it would have had the beneficial effect. Okay? So, and therefore I will also say that, yes, because you see, it's very interesting when we examine, if we really now examine this historically, and this is something I wanted to sort of knit it in, but I didn't get around to it. Look at so many of the things we take for granted that we consider great things. I consider great things about living in the West. Why I still enjoy living in the West, right? For example, I could be the son of a dustman, and I could become the director of a major company. I could become an MP. I could perhaps even become the Prime Minister. Not that I want to, but I could, right? So the idea that you could be born in this part of society, well, look at John Major. His mother was on benefits. He was born in Brixton, went to a comprehensive, his mother was on benefits, and he became Prime Minister. We all take that for granted. If we want to, we can do that. It's just normal for us. But that didn't exist in the West. It didn't exist. Okay? In the time of feudalism, you were a serf, you were a trader, you were a nobleman, you were the clergy. The only way maybe you could move around a bit is by joining the clergy. Where did they get this idea that you could move from any part of society to the other? Look, historically, the only civilization that had a concept like that at the time was the Muslim civilization. If you again look at the idea of science, Christianity has long had a big conflict between science, between the scientific knowledge and the religious knowledge, because Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, right? So it's almost as if knowledge was something dangerous. Okay? Islam never had a problem with that. So what we find is bit by bit, if we start examining it, animal rights. I was just reading today about some of the animal rights, some of the verdicts that Muslim jurists came out about rights for animals. Okay, women's rights of inheritance for women, of women participating in various aspects of society, religious tolerance, and so on and so forth. These were things that we take for granted here in the West, but they were really lights that were taken from the Muslim civilization. Okay, so I know it sounds a bit whatever, but even those things that are really so great about the West, they're things that were inherent and implicit anyway in the Muslim civilization. It's not something that's really a product of the West itself, it's really something, or many aspects of it are something that they borrowed from the civilization of Islam.
Yeah.
So, obviously, I would argue that, yes, the West has many beneficial aspects, but it has many weaknesses, it has many deficiencies. Yes, it has a very rosy image on the outside, but you don't need to dig very deep. You just need to go to America. And you need to really see what America is like behind the movie screen, okay? You find there's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of behind the shiny surface, it's not so nice. Okay? And the strange thing is, if you go to the Muslim lands, it's almost the opposite. Yes, it's grotty, it's corrupt, but if you go behind the surface, you'll find that it's very stable. The family's still important, how the people are, how they behave, etc., etc. Do you understand? It's almost as if the West is showing a nice outside, but when you look inside, it's not so nice. And yes, the Muslim world shows a pretty unpleasant outside, but when you go down and you meet the ordinary people and you see what's going on, it's really not as bad as it looks. So appearances can be deceptive. That's another thing one has to think about. It's not a proof in and of itself anyway, it's just something, like I said, to think about.
Before that, to carry Islamic law, we need the kind of people who can who has the quality to carry out the law.
Yes.
As you said before.
That's very true.
Can you explain what kind of people that can carry the law, and can Muslim in our time do that? Let's say we have a Islamic country carry out Islamic law. Can we really do that?
Allah, I don't know. If you're honestly asking me now, today, no, I don't think so. I don't think the Muslims exist. I don't think there are the people who have the quality and the caliber to do it. If I look at the Muslims today, even if we just look at the Muslim groups, okay, if the Muslim groups, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Hizb al-Tahrir, the Salafiyun, the whoever they may be, right? If these people represent, right, the forefront of calling back to Islam, then I have to say that we're in a pretty hopeless situation. Look how they treat each other. Look how they talk about each other. They can't even be just with each other. How are they going to be just with a Jew or a Christian? We can't even establish the simple etiquettes and manners of brotherhood. Okay, we can't be just with each other. How are we going to be just outside of that? So, this is what I really think. We're racked by partisanship, tribalism. It's a different type of tribalism. It's not like I belong to, the Quraysh, and I belong to, whatever it is, Bani Umayyah, or I belong to this and that. No, now I belong to this group, and I belong to this group, and I belong to this group. And we fight for our group, and we call for our group, and we love for our group, and we hate those people. Maybe not an absolute hate, but we oppose those people who are not with our group. It's not an issue. And the fact is that someone may do something in our group, and we ignore it, and someone in the other group is doing the same thing. We say, look at that person, you see what he's doing? That's really disgusting. That's just tribalism. That's pure tribalism. Well, we call it Hizbiyah, not Asabiyah. It's the same thing though. So I don't see really how these people, if these are at the forefront, well, how about the other people then? So, to tell you the truth, this is why all this stuff, Islamic State, Khilafah, Islamic State, we want to establish Islam, it's just like a lot of wind. You can say that till you're blue in the face. Allah is never going to support people who don't have the qualities. If we don't have those qualities, the qualities of justice first, and justice is, when I was looking at this, I was going through the verse of the Quran talking about justice, the examples of Umar. Who's going to be like Umar? Who's going to be like that? Who gets upset with someone and then goes and says, oh, you whip me like I whip you. Who's going to be like that? Where are the people who are like that? You know, even from amongst the Muslim Islamic groups, where are the people like that? So those are the things to make you realize that, you know, well, alhamdulillah, we worship Allah, we pray to Allah, we do these type of things. Well, that's good. Okay, alhamdulillah, we don't make shirk. That's good. You know, those are good qualities too. But the sort of excellent qualities, okay, that Allah says we will establish these people in authority in the land who believe in Allah and they perform the zakah and they give the zakah and they enjoin justice and they forbid wrong. Okay? So those are the sort of people that are worthy of carrying that banner. Where these people are, who they are they, you know, I'm sure there must be somewhere hiding, probably. They're probably hiding because everyone else is saying you're not of this and that and you're not such and such and you whatever. You know, so the guy's probably sitting real quiet because the moment he pokes his head out, some Muslim group's going to shoot it down. And I don't mean literally shoot it, although that might even happen as well. So, you know, a person asked me, I was giving a class in an adult education center and a person asked me a question. He said, which Muslim country are you really proud of? I said, I'm not proud of any Muslim country. In fact, I can only think of a few Muslims that I'm actually proud of. A few actually Muslim individuals that I'm proud of, let alone a whole country. So the fact is, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, you know. It doesn't really take a lot. I mean, it does take a lot to change. It doesn't need to take a long time to change. But it does need to take a lot of, you know, a lot of effort in yourself. That's what does need to take. People need to change themselves. They need to change their attitudes. They need to change their manner. If they do that, it can happen. But until that happens, no. I don't think we're going to see, you know, that change that we hope for. That's my opinion. Allahu Alam. It will come sometime, but when? Allah knows best. And with who? Allah knows best.
Some countries like Nigeria practice limit Sharia. So I want to ask you about that model. Like there are some obvious deficiencies.
Yep.
And the methodology of Islamic law and the whole ijtihad.
I think that I don't know enough about Algeria, but the little I know about Afghanistan.
Nigeria.
Yeah, I know. No, I did. What did I say?
Algeria.
You know, that was a slip of the tongue. I don't know much about Nigeria. Okay, I don't know much about Nigeria, but I know a little bit more about Afghanistan under the Taliban. Now, there is no doubt that the Taliban tried very earnestly to implement Islamic law. There's no doubt about that. Okay, and there's no doubt as well that what the Taliban did, although it was certainly not perfect by any means, it was a whole lot better than whatever was there before. That's a fact, too. But how did these people behave? Now, if you know the history of the Taliban, these were orphans. A lot of them were orphans, refugees, who went to Pakistan and were brought up in these madrasas. Now, any of you guys who went to a madrasa, right, old traditional madrasa with Mulana stuff, bang, like that, right? Can you imagine that that's where you spend all of your time? Maybe you don't have a mother or a sister. Maybe you don't even see a woman. So you don't know what it's like that your mother hugs you and to feel, you don't even know that. So you're brought up and this is all, that's what you get. You got it wrong, you didn't memorize that, you said it wrong, right? Imagine you being brought up like that. You can learn the surahs, you can learn this law is this and you should grow your beard and cover yourself and this and that. But where's the mercy? And where's the compassion? And where's the justice? And where's all of those things that the Quran teaches? You have to nurture those things in people. So you let these guys go. They may know the book from beginning to end. They may know the hadith. They may know the sharia, which they didn't know that much. But even if they did, but if they don't have those qualities, and they're harsh and they're tough, and they don't understand about what justice is, and they don't understand about those other qualities you need, what are you going to get? You're going to get oppression. Like I said, I can't think. I could, you know, it's probably the worst thing you could think of. People getting hold of Islamic law, right, and just using it in an unjust way. You know, so you execute person for apostasy, but the apostasy is anyone who says they don't like Saddam Hussein, that's apostasy. Okay, boom, kill him. I don't know, whatever, right? Okay, a person is starving and they have to steal some bread, chop his hand off. That's not Islam, that's not Islamic law. Do you understand? Okay, punish the poor people, leave the rich people. Punish the people who are not part of the ruling party, leave the people who are the ruling party. It's going to be horrific. So you understand, it's a complete picture. You have to have those. Now, Nigeria, I don't know enough. I don't know enough about the people. I don't know enough about how they are. I don't know enough about it to make any comment about them at all. So I can't really comment whether they're doing it right or not.
I was talking reference to a case that happened, they were executing a woman before,
But that's the punishment in Islam.
But I was asking about the role ijtihad plays, like Sharia, it's not in other rules which are defined, are the static rules, can they be updated, if
Bro, I'm not an expert in Sharia. I don't know enough about the Sharia, and I said that in the beginning, to be able to talk in depth about those type of things. So I don't know. Those are things that when I find out, I say, okay, what's going on here? Can I go and ask someone to explain to me, is this right? Because I don't know. So those things I don't have any idea, and I don't want to talk about something that I just don't know about. So I know about it generally, but specifically about those type of things, I just don't know. Because I got lots of questions myself, so Allahu Alim. And that's another problem, People say, Sheikh Abdul Rahim, right? I say, brother, please, I am not a sheikh anything, maybe a milk sheikh, right? Okay, but, honestly, like they say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? If I'm the person people think is a sheikh, wallah, we're in a desperate situation. If they think I'm a sheikh, we're desperate. And we are, honestly, we are. We have so little knowledge about our religion. And obviously, again, to implement an Islamic state, you have to have quite a lot of knowledge. Who are our judges going to be? Okay, guys, we want an Islamic state tomorrow. Yeah, Khilafah. Right, who's the judge? I'll be the judge. Right, what should we do? Can't even pronounce Surah Fatiha properly, right? And he's going to be a judge. It's terrifying. So this is the problem, because, we don't even have the framework. So, certainly not here. Maybe in some countries they do. In Egypt, people still go to Al-Azhar and they study Sharia. They do that. Alhamdulillah. And in Nigeria and other places as well. But it's not all that simple. And that's the fact. Yeah.
It may be a question of Sharia as well. I don't know exactly. About death penalty.
Yes.
Man can, a judge is not perfect because he's a man.
Yep.
Okay, even if the law is perfect, but if one is, if the system of death penalty, okay, for individuals it can be just, but for the whole system, a judge or a jury can make mistakes. But if the guy is executed, then what's the solution? Do we take the risk of making mistakes or not?
What are the things for which there is a death penalty in Islam?
No, not too much.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also the Sharia has very, very strict guards. I don't know enough about the details of it, but I know that the guards are very strong before a person could be executed. So I didn't study the Sharia very in depth, okay, and all the conditions and stuff. But you have to be really, really certain. Okay, you have to be really, really certain before someone is put to death. That's for sure. It has to be very conclusive evidence for a death penalty. And I think there's only 3 or 4 things for which there is a death penalty. So, and it has to be, conclusive evidence. It can't be just something that is circumstantial or whatever, or, I don't know. I don't know enough about the details of it, so I shouldn't even speak about it at all. So I don't really know. But the ultimate, at the end of the day, we say we believe in Allah and we're judged by what God has revealed, because we believe that's His wisdom. He knows the weaknesses of the human beings and He knows the strengths of the human beings. So He knows that everyone has to die. I mean, I suppose this all comes back to the Islamic, the whole perception of what life is about. You understand? So I suppose in the sense that, if you live if your outlook is purely materialistic and you say, well, this is the only life I've got and I'm going to die, I'm in the grave and that's it, and the worms eat me, and it's going to be a little bit different from a person who believes that there's a day of judgment and a hellfire and a paradise. The viewpoint, the whole way of looking at the world is going to be something a little bit different. That doesn't mean that human life is not important and sacred. It clearly is, but this all goes back to those fundamental things and those foundational ideas that we're talking about. Yeah. I'm sorry, it would have been good to have someone who really knows about the Sharia. That's my, that's the limit of my knowledge. I don't know the details of the Islamic law. It would be very nice, I would love myself to hear someone who could talk about the Sharia in detail, to explain how about this and that, but it's not in my capability.
As somebody's trying to learn more about the relationship between Islam and the West,
right.
How many problems do you think lie in the fact that a lot of the people, they can't really walk a mile in the other person's shoes? They just can't get inside each other's heads, so they don't try. Do you think there's any problem stemming from that, perhaps?
I think, a lot of these things do come from misunderstandings, not knowing about each other, not being able to appreciate other people's points of view. Yeah, and that's true. There is that sort of problem, and that problem does exist. I think the thing is that, really, if you go and you meet Muslims, and you find they're not inherently hostile, aggressive people, and they're also not inherently judgmental people as well. That's not something really inherent in Muslims. But I mean, what is the... on one hand, you could feel a bit optimistic that there is this coming together, that people are beginning to understand more about each other, and there's a very positive side, that's taking place in the world at the moment. And I think a lot of Muslims are beginning to think again about what is our attitude towards the rest of the world, because there was certainly a whole time in Muslim history when it was like there's us and there's them. There's the believers and there's the disbelievers, right? The people on the truth and the people on the falsehood, and they're oppressing mankind and we're liberating mankind. And certainly for a time that was really true, okay? But now the world seems to be a very different place. Okay, or it may for one brief moment have been like that. I've got a suspicion that, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know whether it's good or bad. Whatever God wills, I suppose. But it looks like everything has been pushed right back to the way it was. And I think some people want it to be like that. From both sides. Some people like it black and white, That's the way we want to keep it. This is the bad guys, we're the good guys, let's just keep it like that. None of this, let's get together and feel alright and talk to each other and stuff like that. Oof. No more wars, no more weapons, no more. So I don't know. It depends where it's, I feel the whole world is on some sort of brink at the moment. Certainly I was talking with a friend of mine and I was saying to him, he's quite knowledgeable, and we were discussing exactly this sort of issue. I said, this definition that many of the scholars, the Muslim scholars, they talked about the world as Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, which means the place of Islam and the place of war. Any place that wasn't a place of Islam was the place of war. I said, is that still true today? I said, well, Allahu Alam, we just don't, Allah knows. Can we really think of the world in that sort of sense anymore? Even scholars hundreds of years ago started thinking of a different type of category called Dar al-Imana, a place of trust, where Muslims live in that land underneath a tap of trust. Okay, but it's a very, very big subject, and it goes back to examining the whole nature of what is jihad, what is warfare in Islam. I think you might have had some talk about that already, right? And it goes back to thinking about all of that. And really, a Muslim wants to do what is pleasing to God. That's what's important to us. Okay, but we know from the Quran, God does not love the aggressor. He doesn't love the transgressor. Yes, God says, fight the disbelievers, right? Fight them, okay, but don't transgress the limits. Don't go over the bounds, because God doesn't love the transgressors. God does not love the aggressors, it says as well. Islam is not supposed to be aggressive. Okay, so if we live in a world now where people are saying, okay, we want to hear about your religion, they actually say, come and tell us what Islam is about. And before, in the time of the Prophet, it was like, you're not coming anywhere near us. You come into our land, we fight you, we kill you. So the Muslims have a right to fight under those circumstances. But how about a world where people say, you come and we want to hear about your religion. You're free, we'll put you on, we'll even make some programs and put them on TV. I mean, are we saying, how do we deal with that? So we have to start thinking again. But if the world is going to stay like that, that's the real question. I don't really know if it's going to stay like that. It's like some people don't want it to be like that. They want it to be all black and white and, let's draw the line again. It's much easier that way. So Allahu Alam. God knows best. We could talk about these things for a long, long, long time.
I think we can wrap up now. And I would like to give my highest appreciation and love to the brother and also the audience who come to this function. So if you have, especially the non-Muslims, if you have any more questions or queries about Islam, then you are welcome to ask us and come round to the prayer room or wherever. A lot of us here, some brothers really obviously have knowledge. The prayer room is in 9 Princess Garden. It's near the nursery, so opposite the health center. It's there, and you can also email us at islam@ic.ac.uk or imperial.ac.uk. So. Inshallah, I think to finish.